Welcome to YIMBY Action's conversations on anti-racism and urbanism. YIMBY Action is a network of pro-housing activists fighting for more inclusive housing policies. We are driving policy change to increase the supply of housing at all levels of affordability and bring down the cost of living, especially in opportunity-rich cities and towns. My name is Laura Foote, and I am the executive director of YIMBY Action. And I hope that if you're excited, at least to continue this conversation, if you're not already a member, to join at yimbyaction.org/join. We're really launching these conversations, this series, as an exercise to take to heart the message that recent, Black Lives Matter movements have really asked us to examine internally and externally what our values around the importance of race in our conversations about every aspect of the housing crisis and the work that we're doing. And so there's kind of two ways that these conversations we're seeing going: internal work and external work. Making urbanism anti-racist, we're thinking about this through the work of what do YIMBYs need to do to make the organizing and the organizations that we are a part of anti-racist? And also, how do we make the work that we do reduce racism in the world? How do we make sure that our policies are doing things like reducing the racial wealth gap? Anyway, we're gonna now pass it off to two amazing people. One of whom is my significant other, Sam Moss, who also is the executive director of Mission Housing. And actually, I'm going to let him introduce Kelsey.
I was actually kind of hoping Kelsey would introduce Kelsey. Kelsey, thank you so much for getting on this with us today. I'm a huge fan. I think that, I'm the executive director of Mission Housing. I built affordable housing in a tiny little bubble that's called San Francisco that actually isn't the only place where things happen, I've been told. But, I'm really excited to talk with you today, about how to make urbanism anti-racist. And I'd love it if you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up getting to the position where you got pressed into having this conversation with me tonight.
Yeah, well, that's a lot, and it's a fun story. So I just want to start by saying thank you so much for, one, inviting me tonight. I'm huge fans of the work that you all do, and it's a huge honor, but also just broader than that, thank you for having this conversation. I have been very vocal in my own little bubble that we call Orange County, and one of the things that I talk about a lot is the importance of us having these conversations, having these dialogues, uplifting different types of voices, and making sure that we're really getting at the root of that. So thank you for leading on that conversation. But for those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet or don't follow me on my rants on Twitter, my name is Kelsey. I am now 26 years old. I just had a birthday. But I grew up in Bakersfield, California. I'm not sure if any of you know where that's at. Hopefully you've driven past it and not had to stay for too long. But that is the place that I called home from the time that I was about 5 years old until right after I turned 18 and moved down to Orange County. I moved down to Orange County to go to school at Cal State Fullerton. I was the first person in my family to go to college. I was a first generation college student. So I had no clue what I was doing at all. And I definitely had no clue anything about Orange County. It was a wild, wild experience for me because growing up in Bakersfield, there was definitely the haves and the have-nots. And there was a ton of, racial segregation along housing lines and all of that. But in terms of wealth disparity, the fanciest car that I had ever seen when I lived in Bakersfield was like a BMW. And then I got down to Orange County and I was like, there's other cars besides BMWs and Mercedes. And they were being driven by people my age going to school and sitting next to me. So that was like the first time that I really got a sense of just how different Orange County was from the experience that I had had for the previous 18 years of my life. That being said, I really believed and had been told my entire life from my family who had never had the opportunity to, attain higher education, that education was a great equalizer. So I really threw myself into my studies and got really, really involved. And I have a natural affinity for politics. And so I found myself kind of drifting that way. And so When I was 19 years old, I was appointed by Governor Brown, then Governor Jerry Brown, to the CSU Board of Trustees, which is the constitutionally created board that governs the 23 campuses of the CSU system. So I was asked to represent, at that time, there was about 475,000 students, and be their voice for 2 years on the board. And I was a very different kind of student trustee. I had excellent training from mentor Talar, who came before me. She also works in Sacramento now. She's amazing. But when I, got there, I was really, really focused on shaking things up and thinking about what education meant in the context of who we are serving. And I'm going to come back to that thought later, because for me, it's really what we're here to talk about. And what I found was that some of our policies of how we were engaging with students, how we were making sure that students were getting what they needed, were not reflective of the actual student body that we were serving, which was older, first generation, reentry students, low income. And we weren't having a conversation about how can we improve graduation rates when the average student is living in an apartment that they can't afford, working 40 plus hours, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the answer is you can't, because if you create policy in a vacuum, you're going to get meager, if any, all results. So when I got to the board, I was really, really focused on integrating the student experience into the actual policy work and the policy proposals that we were doing. So that manifested itself in a bunch of different ways. But one of the things that, I didn't realize at the time was going to be so important in my life, but it ended up being very important, was I helped lead or helped work on a study with the CSU that looked for the first time at the housing and food insecurity needs of our students. And we were not prepared for the results of that study at all. And it happened right as I was leaving my term on the board to enter the quote real world. And, it was kind of my last big thing that I got to work on. And so that's when I found myself at the Association of California Cities. And I just finished working on housing and homelessness at the statewide level. So they're like, do you want to do this in Orange County? And I didn't know that saying yes would lead to all of this. So I'm going to pause there, because that was a lot of words, and I'm going to let Sam interject if he wants to.
Oh, that's really awesome. It seems like, I'm blown away at, what you've managed to accomplish in such a relatively short time. It also does seem like every step, of the way you've gone, like that perhaps you've kind of been, I don't know if you could talk about you have represented an extremely underrepresented segment of society. And I hate to admit it, but even as you get to affordable housing, it's the truth, and I think that's kind of why we're here tonight. If you could talk a little bit, I hate that you have to be this trailblazer, right? It's incredible.
Okay. If you're a Black woman, you're used to it.
No, I'm blown away. I'm truly blown away. I'd love to hear a little bit about that. The amount of strength and poise you must have to do that is not something that most people can comprehend.
Yeah, so I always kind of tell people that I realized I was Black twice in my life. And the first time was when I was really, really young. And I had my first experience with racism living in Bakersfield. And that was the first time it clicked that we're not just different shades just because that actually means something to some people. And obviously there was a lot of growth and progression that went around that thought to get to where I am now. But when I was in college, it was almost not that I could hide, but that I could almost pretend that my little microcosm of life that I had created at Cal State Fullerton that was incredibly accepting, incredibly affirming, incredibly diverse, was what wider Orange County was like. And when I, and when I got to my first job at the association, when I first left, I think that was the first moment that I really remember for the second time of my life going, oh wait, I'm Black, actually Black. And yeah, it was subtle at first, and it was incredibly isolating, because for a long time there was also the issue of, outside of my immediate job, where I had an amazing boss whose name is Heather, and she was incredibly supportive. But outside of that kind of immediate circle, I was also surrounded with the lack of diversity in terms of gender. So it was an incredibly isolating experience for probably the first year. And then I was lucky enough to, get more into the housing work. And I was lucky enough to find a little bit of diversity there. There's a wonderful woman that I had the opportunity to work with when I was at the association. Her name's Bex, and she continues to do this work on homelessness and housing today. And, she's that kind of person that I would go to for that support, that I could just look across the room and know that somebody like that got it. But for me in Orange County, the first time that I really understood, without a doubt, how closely housing and race were related, especially in Orange County, was when I was working on a piece of legislation to create the Orange County Housing Finance Trust here in Orange County, which eventually did pass and became law, and it was great. But the process to getting there was very, very, very painful. And I'll never forget that, I had a series of meetings throughout the week that had been really, really tough. And, you get yelled at so many times that it just kind of all blurs together. But a baseline is the idea that we're all working towards the same goal, which is what I was telling myself as we were going through this. And then I had a council member from a city in South Orange County call me up, and he told me that, I wasn't allowed to be here, that I was never going to be welcome here. And, he called me the N-word, and, how dare I think that I can come in here and build this kind of housing in his community. And it was the first time that I saw that it wasn't just because I was Black that he was saying these things to me. It was what I was advocating for, which was more affordable and supportive housing, which translated so easily for folks into diversity and color in my communities, and I don't want that. But we have allowed ourselves to be less critical around the ideas of housing and their impacts, to where somebody can say something like, I just want to maintain my neighborhood character, and we don't immediately say that's racist.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really good point. So if we could go back a little bit to the Association of California Cities, so you were interacting with other city, were there representatives from other cities? I assume that and is that essentially how the cities down in LA in Southern California work together on things like housing and urban transit, things like that?
Yeah, so it's really similar. So the association has an interesting history. I wasn't here for a lot of it, but it was created in 2011 to break away from the League of Cities. And that was because they had some differing opinions on things like greenhouse gas emissions and stuff like that. So they wanted to create kind of this opportunity for their voices to still be elevated. And so when I came to the association in 2016, I was hired on as a policy analyst and eventually began leading the policy division, and then eventually took on our legislative relations. But yeah, so our role was to interact and really be a think tank for policy. We kind of created forums for these electeds to have conversations, to think these things out. But we also were a recommender of policy. And so, I worked on everything from like drone regulations to 5G cell tower regulations to housing. So
public meetings about cell towers are the worst. It's the only, they're the worst. Yeah. So, then you left Association of Cities, and Jamboree is very lucky to have you for now till you work for Mission Housing. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that transition, and just, in terms of diversity and equity, in terms of leaving kind of the public sector, because Jamboree, like Mission Housing, is a private development corp. It's nonprofit, of course, but it is a developer. It's a private developer. And, in terms of, representation, did you find a lot of similarities going from this public sector to the
night and day? It was in a lot of ways, and that's not to say that there's not still a lot of work that our company and the industry as a whole still needs to do, but I started interacting with Jamboree probably in late 2016, early 2017. And that was because Helen Cameron, who's now my coworker, was at all of my homelessness task force meetings. And she kept sitting in the back and just saying every opportunity she got, why aren't we talking about permanent supportive housing? Why aren't we talking about permanent supportive housing? So I finally said, Helen, let's go get lunch. And she told me all about permanent supportive housing. I was like, that sounds great. We should do more of that. So Jamboree became a place for me to go to for just expertise and assistance. I could ask them the stupid question of, if I want to build 2,000 units of this kind of housing, how much money am I going to need? And they would sit there and help us run numbers to do that. And I just always thought that it was so amazing that, it was not, like you said, it's a private company, it's a development team, but, everybody always wants to say that they have a community outward facing kind of commitment, but Jamboree was one of the only ones that I saw that were really investing in the community and in the work. And that was really, really exciting for me. So when I was looking to transition, I pitched myself to Jamboree actually. And so I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to sit down and meet with their team and talk to them. And I joined the team back in November of 2018. And I have had an absolute blast ever since then. But the thing that attracted me most to the company was the fact that they had so many women and so many women in positions of power and in positions of authority within the company. They weren't just, your mid-level employees, they were directors, they were VPs. And that was really, really exciting to me. But in the wake of, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and all of this, we have started to have conversations internally about what our work means in this context, how we can reflect that in our staff, how we can reflect that in our board, how we can reflect that in the product that we create in communities. And what we've done is we've taken one action step, which is our board of directors has said that they will match $10,000 worth of donations to a bunch of different nonprofits that deal with issues of systemic racism and Black lives. But we've also committed to continuing the conversation and figuring out what internal steps we could take. So I say all of that to say the two experiences couldn't be more different, because while Jamboree is certainly not perfect and we certainly have things that we need to improve upon, it's an environment where I feel safe and supported, and with colleagues that want to do the work with the intention of improving our communities long-term, and knowing that that's going to involve the community itself speaking into our projects and speaking into the work that we're doing.
That's great. So, I'd love it if you would talk a little bit about, what doing the work means. And then I guess I'm wondering if you think there's hope for these cities of Southern and Northern California at all. I am cautiously optimistic that now is a point in all of our lives where maybe there is a possibility for us to stop being so horrible. But, I also know that it's, Rome wasn't built in a day and whatnot. So I'd love to know what, your thoughts are on actually putting that work in.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to answer the second part of your question first and then go back, if that's okay. And the answer is, yeah. I mean, I sound kind of jaded and sarcastic. That's just my personality.
Right to sound
it has nothing to do with all of these experiences. It really, truly is just my personality. But what I would say is, when we started working on this issue really seriously in 2017, 2018 on the 2,700 unit plan, on AB 448, all of these different pieces, the Orange County United Way had just announced their United to End Homelessness campaign, Jamboree, and them had partnered on a United to End Homelessness study. So it was all of these different pieces that all kind of came together at the right time. And I still remember looking at my boss, Heather, at the time and going, we're insane. No one's going to listen to us. This is not, we're going to just get fired at the end of all of this, which, but, we said, this is the right time. This is the right moment, and we have to at least try. And we got pretty far. And I think that we're going through a kind of a rebound of, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think we're experiencing that right now with some of the legislation we're seeing come out of Orange County and some of the reactions we're seeing come out of Orange County. But what was really, really exciting to me was I found other people that cared about this really, really deeply. and wanted to do the work and wanted to commit to the work. And just that alone means that we've continued moving the needle, because we've taken these folks that maybe had no interest or really any idea about the work that we're doing in Orange County. And now they're out there advocating for it, and they're talking about it. You know, Elizabeth, you know, who connected me with all of you, she's been in this a little bit longer than 2017, but, you know, she went to a meeting and heard that housing was like one of the most important things that we can do to change people's lives in California. And she started her own group, and now she was a one-woman show for a really long time, but, you know, she kept coming, and she now has a group that's active, that shows up at meetings and do it. So I would say that, yes, I definitely think there is I have a lot of hope that we can continue to make progress in places like Orange County, because God, if we can do it in Orange County,
Sure.
we can do it anywhere.
Nowhere to go, but yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But what I would like to say, kind of with that optimism, is I think we need to have a critical lens over what the success looks like. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, one, I think it looks different for every community. Mm-hmm. And two, I think that if we've been defining success as 3.5 million homes by 2025, that's great, but do we need to take a more critical lens to that goal and say, of that 3.5 or 2.5 or whatever number we're all arguing about now, how many of that is serving these kinds of communities? How is this adjusting to meeting educational needs? How are we adjusting to make sure that these are meeting healthcare needs? Because housing, for at least for us, you know, the lens and the cult that I have joined of Jamboree believes that housing is a platform for delivering all of those other services, for helping, you know, close education gaps, for helping close healthcare gaps. But there has to be a broader conversation in the housing advocacy group of the importance of that, because otherwise, all we've done is built really, really awesome buildings, and that's totally necessary. And there's a lot of people that just need that. Mm-hmm. But for us to be more critical about this space that we're operating in, I think we have to redefine what success looks like and include race, gender, income in that analysis.
That's well said. I can't stop thinking about that Orange County Council person telling me
I have more stories. Yeah, no, that's my worst one. But
the thing about affordable housing is that like you said, housing is at this intersection of, you can't have housing without race. It's embedded in our country, from wealth generation to just true segregation. And building affordable housing, and like Jamboree, you know, I looked at your map, like I think we're all starting to try to want to build affordable housing in more affluent neighborhoods, because like, why shouldn't everyone deserve to live in Lafayette, you know? And so like, I think that maybe the affordable housing industry gets a little bit of like people saying the quiet parts out loud, without even really realizing it, you know? Like one time we had a neighborhood group send us a letter saying they'd appreciate it if we built a wall in between our building and their neighborhood, you know, like, and like, I guess maybe they felt justified, but like, that's not cool, man, you know? And I have to imagine that, I mean, you know, do you feel like you're getting that more or less? I mean, I think as you move to Jamboree from the cities, I guess, you know, what are your thoughts on that? Like, you know, because I like rage and I just want to scream at people, and you know, I don't have
same always. But you know, for me, like I say, I keep joking, but you know, I have been Black my whole life, and so I think for me, this is just how my life is. So we do have conversations, or I do have conversations at work and make recommendations. You know, if we're having a meeting and I don't think that I'm the right person for X, Y, and Z reason to interact with this person, I make the recommendation that I don't go to that meeting, because it's more important that we get the housing done than it is for me to have my ego or whatever to just to be in the room. Like, that's not important. So yeah, it absolutely has an effect, because I think for me, what I always realize is when I walk into a room, before folks know who I am, before folks know my credentials, and especially after quarantine when my hair looks like this and I'm dressing like this, you know, I'm somebody's worst nightmare in a lot of cities. Like, me existing in a lot of these communities is somebody's worst nightmare. And you couple that with the fact that I'm there to tell you how great affordable housing is, that can be really scary for people sometimes. And so I combat that with trying to be as good at my job as I can, of trying to tell stories, because I find that stories are incredibly powerful at helping communicate really, really complex ideas. And Jamboree and just affordable housing in general has so many good stories to tell. But I also find that, we're starting to see a shift at the state level where we're going to have to address these issues. And the choice piece of it is going away. And I'm not sure if that's going to make my life harder or easier in Orange County, but we'll see.
Yeah, and so so you're at Jamboree now, and I believe your title is communications, but you still, I have to imagine that they didn't say don't do policy anymore.
Yeah.
Communications. So how does that kind of intersect with what you're doing?
Yeah, so policy for us is we speak into a lot of the groups statewide. So my role a lot of times is, to analyze the policy that we're seeing come out of Sacramento. And if it's in a phase where it's a draft, we can try sometimes utilize my network and other networks to try to influence that. But, last Thursday, I was up until about 10:30 at night finishing a brief because the Senate just finished voting on the budget, and they voted on the housing budget trailer bill. And I had to flag for, our team, hey, part of the motel conversions, there's a policy issue here of it needs to be zoned. Sorry for the people on the call. I'll explain this later. That needs to be zoned. One of the underlying uses has to be housing, and they're not allowing you to use a conditional use permit, CUP. You're going to hear that again, and discretional permit or discretionary permit. And if you don't, meet those standards, you don't apply for the money. And so I flagged that for our team, and I said, okay, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, it's just, my job is really to be as flexible as possible and to fill in the gaps. And I'm just really, really lucky to be able to work with a team that understands that the story that we're telling outside and in the community affects all of the different things that we're doing on the business side of the group. But yeah, I haven't been able to do a whole lot of policy since going to Jamboree, but a lot of it's been focusing on understanding the impacts for us and speaking into those impacts as well.
And I have to say, I thank you for your answer. It's great. I do feel, it makes me mad that you feel like sometimes you don't be in the room, like, because you're someone's worst nightmare or whatever. Like,
no, it's okay.
I have no idea what that's.
It's not okay. It's not okay, but
ripping in privilege over here, and so, I know I try to always make sure that our tenants are represented. And, I really find that it's got to come from the leadership, and from the top down. And so do you work with Jamboree's board or anything like that in terms of, or do you deal with like the overall, like, kind of diversity of the company and the outward facing image?
So I would say that we're starting these conversations, but we have an incredibly open communication style at Jamboree. I have my direct boss, and then I also have a direct line of communication to our CEO, Laura, who's also a wonderful, fantastic co-conspirator in this journey to try to make Urbanism anti-racist with us. But, she makes sure that we know who the board is. The board knows who we are. I've had the opportunity to communicate directly with our board members. So yeah, I would say that it's one of the places where, as a company, not just outside of like my direct boss, but as a company, I feel incredibly supported, not only as a woman in the company, but also as a Black woman, which is really rare, especially in Orange County. So
I think, so just so everybody knows, I think we're a little less than 10 minutes before the Q&A section starts. So write all your most awesome questions, please. Don't forget. Before we get to that, you had mentioned that you were going through the Senate and the funding bill. And, I think with recent cries to defund police, and I think for the first time, and just with COVID, and just, I think that the affordable housing industry, just the housing industry in general, I think people had really started to finally get, basically middle-class white people started to be affected by the housing crisis, and lo and behold, everyone started paying attention. And I think that I would like to know your thoughts on, I think that housing should be part of every department's budget. I think that, I'm biased, of course, but I'd love to know your thoughts on like just the healing power of housing and, what it can do. We have systematically eroded wealth from entire generations and communities in this country, unless you're white. And like just the act of having stable housing, I'd like, it's powerful. And I'd like, do you think that other departments, other, people, do you think that people are going to start to agree with that?
I mean, I think you have to, because as I mentioned, I first started realizing the power of housing. Oh, I forgot to go back to this. I made a point earlier. Now we're going to connect it. Here we go. Welcome to my brain, everyone. So I made the point earlier that when I first started college, that I was taught my whole life, and as a first generation Black woman, everybody in the family was very excited for me to go to college. But again, I was taught that that was the great equalizer. Mm-hmm. And when I got onto the CSU Board of Trustees and I started seeing data and having the opportunity to talk to students from Humboldt and SLO and, Stanislaus all across, the state, and really hearing the difference in experiences, it's when I really began to make the connection of, all right, we're all in the same ocean, but we are definitely not in the same boat. Like our boats are very different. And that's when I started to make the connection of how can I expect these students to take 16 credits and do X, Y, and Z things and take their high impact courses. How can I expect them to do that if they're sleeping in their car and showering at the rec center?
Right.
And that was really for me when I began to realize, like, base level, you got to have somewhere to live to do anything else. And that's really where I started to kind of shift my own career to go more at that housing rate, because there was so many of these different things that I was incredibly passionate about. Education attainment is huge for me, but I can't stand and preach about education attainment at the K through 12 level when I've, redlined or zoned, all of these kids out of the best schools in their community. That would be just me lying to them. And so for me, being able to address so many of those other things comes back to our ability to provide safe, sustainable, and affordable housing to communities everywhere in California and across the country. So it's my long-winded answer, but I connected the point, so I was happy.
I just want to go out and build housing right now, man.
I know, right? Let's do it.
So, putting this all together before the questions, in the context of what you do now and when you were at school and the trustee and with the cities, what does being anti-racist mean to you?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question.
Or had nothing to do with that question.
I should have known. So, what I would say is, it's a story that I use a lot. So if you do follow me on Facebook or you're my friend and you decided to watch this because you wanted to see my face tonight, I'm sorry, you've already heard this story. But for those of you that haven't, I think of being anti-racist as action. And the way that I like to tell the story, because anti-racist is kind of a new term that has popped back up. It's not new in the Black community, but for white folks, it's new. The one that was thrown around a lot is allies. I think a lot of us have heard the term allies. We all like to have it on our shirts and our pins, and we put it outside of our offices. It's great, right? But I always talk about the fact that the Black community needs less allies and more co-conspirators. And when I talk about co-conspirators, there's this great author that talks about this concept. It is an actual academic concept for her. And she talks about Bree Newsome. And I'm not sure if any of you know that name, but for those of you that don't, a few years back after the Dylann Roof shooting, some of you may remember the young Black woman that climbed the flagpole and brought a flag down and was arrested. And, it was a lot of different memes. But what people don't know is that was actually a very planned out moment. They were sitting across the street. They were waiting for the signal to go across the street, take down the Confederate flag. So there was a young white man that was with Bree, and his job was to stay with Bree the entire time, be the white shield, right? To be the ally, quote unquote. Mm-hmm. And so they get the signal, they go out across the street, and she starts climbing up the flagpole. And around the flagpole is this little gate. And about 5 minutes in, the cops show up. Bree's about halfway up this very, very tall flagpole. And, you know, this white guy standing outside of the little gate, waiting, looking up at her. And then the cops walk over and he hears them start talking about, oh, well, we'll just tase the pole. Because if we tase the pole, it'll electrocute her, she'll fall down. It'll be great. And they were talking about it so casually. And the lesson that we're supposed to learn from this part of the story is an ally, their allyship stops at the gate surrounding the flagpole. Because I'm going to yell up at Bree, hey, they're going to electrocute you, just giving you an FYI, but like the cops are here, so there's nothing else I can do. But what this young gentleman did that made him go from being an ally to being a co-conspirator was he stepped into the gate and he put his hand on the flagpole. And suddenly, when a white man's hand was on the flagpole, the cops weren't talking about electrocuting it anymore. So I tell you that story to highlight two things. We need action from you. We need your action. And two, your action doesn't always have to be really big. Sometimes it can literally be just putting your hand out on a flagpole, and that's it. So listen to your community when they ask for help, when you can, show up. And it's okay if what we're asking for sounds really, really small. Just start there and work with us on it. So that would be what I would say to me anti-racism is.
Nate, that was beautiful. Thank you very much.
That was awesome. So I'm going to help with the Q&A. And since I'm helping, I get to ask the first question. So one of the things that I could not help but think a lot about as you were talking about kind of like how you deal with yourself as someone, you know, that you're going into the room and the public perceptions of it. You know, for a while, I think a lot of YIMBY activists, we fully knew and we were very steeped in the fact that a lot of anti-housing rhetoric is veiled racism. And sometimes the veil comes off and sometimes it remains veiled racism. And then the idea that a lot of people were pushing was that therefore our activism should focus on things that are like more palatable, like environmentalism. Like there are a lot of different reasons one can be pro-housing. So let's focus on like intergenerational wealth and like white kids not getting what their parents got, or the environment and how like we're going to destroy the planet Earth.
Yeah, we're going to talk around it.
Yeah, talk around it. And like, you know, and YIMBYs are always like, you know, we're interested in a lot of different things. So we kind of talked about a lot of different things. And one thing that I think this like national shift in the conversation has meant is that like the desire to talk about race is there. It is strong within the YIMBY movement. It is strong. It is fundamental to every conversation around housing, and to deny that truth is absurd. And I am wondering, like, affordable housing has especially danced around that issue for a long time. You know, where do you think that's, like, I see so much of the changing conversation. Where do you see that then coming into the work that you're going to be doing? And do you feel like I feel like there's this big shift, and I kind of want you to be like, yes, there's a big shift. And like, we're all going to go on this like big shift thing.
I mean, I can do that if you want.
But I want you to also do a reality check on me as well. Like, you know.
Yeah, no, I definitely, so here's what I'm going to say. I am super excited that folks that maybe always kind of knew that this was there are now realizing how important it is to call it out. That is a huge win and a huge step. But what I always tell folks, and this is why I was so grateful to see you do this specific program, is that a lot of times when police shootings happen and the racism that is still very much alive in our country is kind of slaps us all in the face again, or slaps white people in the face again. There's this idea of we all have to focus and shift all of our attention to that thing. And that's why I was so excited to see a group that does housing 24/7, not have another fucking panel about police brutality, but rather have a panel about how to make housing less racist. So my point being that I'm excited if we can stay in our lanes and use issues of race and class and gender to inform the work that we are doing, because it's not just that Black people are getting shot in the streets. It is not just that. It is that we are dying in childbirth 5 times more than white women. It's the fact that we own homes 23% less than white people. You know, it's all of these other pieces that need our equal attention and our equal favor. But I also am saying that, you know, when we do have this moment to capitalize on it, you know, in my other hat that I have on, I also serve as the chair of the Orange County Young Democrats. And one of the things that we're working on is our endorsement process right now. And, you know, this is informing the questions that we're asking. And one of the things that I'm going to ask is, tell me how your housing element isn't racist, or tell me how it is, and tell me how you're going to fix it. Because if you're telling me that you're a candidate that believes in systemic racism and wants to address systemic racism, and you can't tell me the basic problems with your housing element, then we're going to need to have a conversation about it. You know, so I hope that we can lean into it in that way. But I also think that there's the pushback, because I think about this argument working in certain cities, and then I think about this argument in other cities in Orange County, and I don't think they would even have the meeting with us to have a conversation. So I think it depends.
Okay, great. So from Ernest Brown, who's our board chair, he says, I really appreciate Kelsey's attention to the nuance of making sure policies match the people we're attempting to serve. In the affordable housing context, what opportunities do you see to address the need to build wealth in Black communities through the work you all do? So I guess Kelsey and Sam.
Kelsey first, for sure.
So what I would say is, you know, at Jamboree, we work with tax credits. So that means that there's bunch of regulations that come with it of what we can do, what we can't do, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think there's ways that we can be creative. And I shared this with Sam a little bit earlier that, you know, one of the things that I think the YIMBY movement, one of the things that I think affordable housing in general has gotten pushback on is the idea of affordable housing and gentrification, and where do they intersect? How do they hurt each other? How do they improve each other? And, you know, we're not immune to that conversation either. And so we started to have conversations about how, you know, just because TCAC says you're serving 30 to 60%, when you go in to make, you know, the actual unit mix of a deal, how do you make sure that that unit mix reflects what exists in the current community? So, you know, it may be the case that you think that a community needs 50% AMI, but if you go in and you do an actual market study of that community, you find out that it's actually closer to 45%. Well, if you know that and you can shift your unit mix to reflect that and still make the deal pencil out, I'm hearing my development team in the back of my head right now, and still make the deal pencil out, you know, there's a stronger likelihood that the folks that already exist in that community will also be able to be utilizing the housing that you're building, hopefully decreasing, you know, displacement. So that's not an all kind of solution, but it's, again, just an example of taking the extra step to know that just because the HUD region that you're working in says X, Y, and Z for 30 through 60% AMI doesn't mean that the neighborhood that you're deciding to build in needs that kind of housing, and working with that community to build that.
And I have to say, you know, at Mission, one thing that I noticed when I got to affordable housing was this, and because of my privilege, socioeconomic, like there was this social safety net that I just took for such granted growing up. And it's like you said before, you know, Mission Housing believes the more housing we can build, the more we stabilize a community, the more we can provide the social safety net. And for us, you know, there's this adage sometimes that people think affordable housing is successful if someone moves into it and then moves out of it. Mm-hmm. And that is not the way what my favorite success stories are when there's like a grandma and grandpa who started off as newlyweds 35 years earlier, and now their granddaughter's going to college, you know, and she won't, you know, she probably won't need affordable housing, but if she does, we can provide it. And I think that what we did with the wealth gap and you know, how we used housing as like racial weaponization in this country is, a lot of us take that for granted, you know, and not being housing secure is the worst thing in the world. And so like at Mission, what we really try to do is like make sure that generations of families will kind of have the same social safety net that I personally took for granted.
Sorry, I have another thought, if I can just jump in really quick. The other thing I would say, we didn't talk about it a lot, but I also think that there needs to be a broader conversation and a deeper thought in Sacramento about how we can readjust some of the, you know, Cal HFA programs that we have going on that are dealing with for sale, you know, home ownership, and how we can revamp some of those to address some of the races, the generational wealth issues. Because yes, for stabilization, that piece of it, 100% affordable housing is the answer. But, I also am aware that my dad is the first generation in our family to own home.
It's still the only way. It's still the way that we build wealth in this country.
Yeah. And we have to address that. And
until everyone gets included in it, then we're just not gonna get forward.
Yeah.
Next question.
Okay. So Kayla Smith asks, what are your tactics when you're faced with progressive organizations and groups that end up being against development? Do you have special tactics with them, or?
I run away.
I listen. So that would be what I would say. I mentioned the Orange County Young Democrats, which means that I deal with the progressive moderate divide in every situation because it exists in every possible policy issue. So I also think that I just have a lot of experience with that, and I kind of speak both languages really, really well. But at the end of the day, what I find is that, sitting down and talking with the community can deal with a lot of issues. It cannot deal with everything. If somebody is committed to being anti-housing, they're going to be anti-housing, and that's okay. But, Jamboree has so many great stories from even before my time there of how a community meeting where our design team sat down and just let the community yell and scream at them for 2 hours solved 98% of all of the headaches and led to a better overall project in the end. So that's kind of how I approach it, but I also think there's an education piece too. So I like to think about the fact that a lot of times we associate NIMBYism with maybe a more conservative mind frame, but there are plenty of liberals that I know that are NIMBYs as well. And yeah, all the time. So, I spent a lot of time at the association doing a lot of that education piece. And you know what? It was awful, terrible, long, hard work, but it makes me so happy now when I go to a council meeting and I hear a council member that I had had coffee with 9 different times about this say, permanent supportive housing is the answer to how we solve homelessness. I'm like, okay, it's worth it. So nice. I think we just got to continue the conversation.
I also do think, from the MV's perspective, it's important we have to reckon with the fact that, it's only legal to build apartments in most low-income neighborhoods in the country. And, super rich Beverly Hills group saying they don't want housing is not the same as the low-income group of people of color that, are merely saying, Jesus, this is the only place that you're building this. Like, it's not the same. And, I think that as far as housing advocacy goes, it's really important to differentiate between that, because it goes back to, these people of color, like this is where they've been redlined to for generations, and so just my own 2 cents, I do think that it's really important for YIMBYs to differentiate that whenever they give public comment.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay, next question. From Theo Gordon, beyond getting housing insecure folks into quality homes through the work of Jamboree and Mission Housing, should we be focusing on expanding homeownership and the benefits that come with that? And if so, how do we do this?
Yes, you got the thought out before, you got the question out before I got the thought out. So yeah, 100%. I mean, I don't know how radical I can be. So my quick answer of how we do that is like reparations, but that's never going to happen. The shorter answer of how we do that is I definitely think that, I am excited by some of the movement in California that I've seen on things like ACA 5, which I think we think a lot about in the context of education, and we should, but, affirmative action has gotten a really, really bad rep. But I would say that one of the only ways that you can really systemically go in and try to address the gap of home ownership in the Black community is with race-specific targeted programs. That doesn't necessarily mean that everybody's getting a free home. So before someone finds this video and says, I want to give a free home to a person because they're Black, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that, just as like we have down payment assistance program for vets, there's a way to do that there could be a way for us to do that for folks based on race, based on income, generational things. So I would say that until we fix the funding sources from a development side, I don't think there's a lot that we can do.
And the regulatory too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we know that there's still a ton of racism when it comes to mortgage lending, even just realtors, and that's for renting apartments too. So I mean, I think that there's like systematic things we have to address. But it would be cool if there was a condo in every pot.
Yeah.
Someday,
One day.
one day.
Okay, another one from Ernest. Blue sky thinking, with the goal of delivering safe, affordable housing to Black communities, how radically do we need to change the current housing systems, both traditional and affordable, to meet their needs? So totally like now being encouraged to go as radical as you want to go, Kelsey.
Yeah, I mean, you have to, everything, all of it. So like starting with the state constitution, with Article 34, like it's embedded in there deep, guys. But yeah, what I would say is, one, you ban single family homes. That would be like me being like, and that's not even that radical. It's not even that radical. But I would say that you should be able to build an apartment, an accessory dwelling unit, a duplex, a triplex, whatever kind of housing you want anywhere in any community. No community should be able to just say unilaterally, nope, we're drawing the line here. If you weren't here before, you don't get to come in now. No community should be able to do that. Second, your school should not be tied to property taxes, because one of the reasons why you continue to see redlining progress and you continue to see this division is, once racism is really smart, you guys, and systemic racism is even smarter, it perpetuates on its own. So once you set these things up through redlining, the government can say things like, well, we haven't done redlining in 30 years, but you've set up the system to where it now has the best schools and the best resources and the best, amenities, to where those continue to be desirable neighborhoods, which continue to mean that people of means, typically white people, continue to live in those neighborhoods, and people of color are systematically left out. And so for me, if you can detach housing or property taxes from education, you fundamentally open up a different way of thinking about what makes a neighborhood good. And you also change the idea that poor kids deserve to go to like poorly funded schools. So those are like my two things off the top of my head. If you want, we can connect after and I can tell you even more of the radical things that I don't want to say because this meeting is being recorded. So.
Oh, I mean, I think that, Kelsey, when we were talking earlier today, you mentioned the red line map. We'll have a link for anyone that doesn't know what redlining is. I'm sure we can have a link to the definition, but the red line maps are still the exact same as all the zoning maps in every major city
Exactly the same.
of this country. And actually, when Laura and I were just getting to know each other, she gave the first presentation I saw her give. I remember how powerful it was to look at both maps, next to each other. And like, that's, I mean, it kills me sometimes for when governments say that they aren't doing redlining. It's called planning now. We've just changed the definition, but
all right. I'm going to pull us back because this will be our last question, and it's a good one.
Two affordable housing developers together.
Oh man, yes, ranting about redlining is Yimby and Urbanist's favorite hobby. But so this is a good one from Kenneth Russell. What gives you motivation and energy, especially during these uphill battles?
Well, for me, I'll give you my really personal answer, and then I'll give you like the answer I give all of my friends when they call me and tell me that they can't do this. My personal answer would be that I don't have the option of not doing that, because I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. And I carry that very deeply within me, knowing that the life that I have the opportunity to live and the work that I get to do is a gift that was not given to so many people in my family, let alone women in my family. And so, when I find myself having a pity party, I spend a moment and I think about my grandmother, and I think about what she went through to just get an 8th grade education, just an 8th grade education. And suddenly, me working at home and staying isolated and doing this thing that I don't want to do suddenly doesn't seem as hard. But the other piece that I would say is I was very blessed to have, you know, a family that instilled with me the idea that we are put here for a reason and a time and a certain place. And I don't necessarily like the time and place that I have been given. I would like a little bit of a calmer era if I could find one, but you know, we're here for a reason. And so every morning I wake up, I just say, okay, it's time to continue doing that work. But what I would say that I tell my friends wider is take care of yourself. You cannot continue to do this mind melting, soul crushing, hope dashing work if you do not take care of yourself, because there is always going to be another fight. There's always going to be another planning commission hearing, another discretionary review hearing. I have like so many of these coming up. There's always going to be another one, but if you take care of yourself, I really truly believe that helps. And also surround yourself with cheerleaders. You know, I mentioned some of the people that I met along the way in this world, and it's been great to have those folks, even if you don't talk to them for a really, really long time, to just know that, like, if I need them, they get the issue, they understand it, they will be there to support you. So that's what I would just say is remember why you do the work, and then take care of yourself so you can continue to do the work.
That was amazing. And I'm going to do a little plug. You know, if you're looking for cheerleaders, yimbyAction.org/join. I am so grateful. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your insights with us. I really do think that one thing that the YIMBYs want our community to be is that place where we are uplifting people to go back into battle. And so, you know, the hearings where we're organizing people on Slack and pepping each other up and saying, oh my gosh, that was such a great public comment. That's a thing that I think I know we can deliver on that. And I know we can deliver the wind at the backs of the people who are fighting to get housing built in communities that have historically done everything they can to keep people out. And I hope that we can do all that and more to support the work that you're doing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us. And thank you to everybody who tuned in.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks for having me.